Have a great moment, everyone. Welcome once again to Academia Gonzaga, and this is the philosophy of biology, of which our main topic for this moment is natural selection. You did not hear me wrong, it's natural selection. By the way, this is Mentor Noy, and once again, welcome to our online learning system. So, what is natural selection? This is very common in the world of science, especially in the philosophical side of it, wherein they are defending evolution as a theory. Now, according to Oxford Dictionary, natural selection is the process whereby organisms better adapt to their environment and tend to survive and produce more offspring. Well, this theory or the theory of its action was first fully expounded by no less than Charles Darwin himself and is now believed to be the main process that brings about evolution. Of course, this is an excerpt from his book, The Origin of the Species. Well, let us dig deeper into the mind of Darwin. What is running inside his head when he conceptualized natural selection? Well, let me first give you my personal disclaimer. This presentation of the Darwinian viewpoints in natural selection should not be taken as the scientific or theological truth that should be accepted by each individual person. This is just a scientific view of one person who attempted to explain the diversity and complexity of the world that we have now. I hope that is clear. So, Darwin actually has five very important philosophical views in natural selection. Philosophical view number one: individuals have variations, and these variations cause their ability to adapt. Thus, individuals with good adaptive traits will most likely reproduce and pass on the traits to the next generation, while those that have bad or dwindling adaptive traits will most likely reduce in reproduction and eventually result to extinction. Well, what is meant by this philosophical view is that the more that an individual has variation of traits, variation of hereditary factors within him, the more that the individuals will be susceptible to adjusting to the community. Meaning, philosophical view number one of Darwin is still talking about adaptability. But adaptability in this sense is more of the more that you have these kinds of traits within you, the more that you are adaptive. So meaning, Darwin is pointing out that the lesser you have hereditary traits taken from both parents that you have, the lesser is the tendency for you to be adaptive to your society, to your environment, and the greater tendency will be for you to be extinctive or to be eradicated from this world. So again, in terms of natural selection, philosophical view number one is trying to tell us that the more that you have traits acquired from your parents, the more that you have, what do you call this, genes that you get from your parents, the more that you will become adaptive, and the higher the tendency that you will not be extinctive, and the greater is the possibility that you will adapt and pass on your genes to the next generation. That is philosophical view number one of the Darwinian philosophical viewpoint. Philosophical view number two of Darwin in natural selection. Natural selection can lead to specification, wherein one of the processes that drives evolution and helps to explain diversity on Earth. Meaning, Darwin is trying to tell us that there are really no multiple sources of living organism in this world. There might have been only very few, or shall we say one or two, that when they mated together, different traits come out of that meeting. Okay, example: father gave fewer traits and mother gave greater traits, and then it formed an offspring, and this offspring becomes a different breed or a different species. Now, because of this kind of development, Darwin pointed out that even just we started with very few or only one or two species, we can still produce so many species because of the distinctive combination and imperfection and natural joining of the traits from one source to another. Now, Darwin explained in Natural Selection Philosophical View number 2 that this is the cause why we have diversified species of living organism in this world. Quite a clever collection of logical thinking, and hoping that this is correct. Now, let us go to the Darwinian philosophical view on natural selection, philosophical view number 3. According to Darwin, natural selection is in contrast with artificial selection or selective breeding. The point being driven here is, okay, let me explain this one. When dogs are left in the wild, naturally, they see another dog. They are not concerned with what breed is that, with what family is that. They do mating right away. And then, according to Darwin, they produce something different. It's already a different species. Now, another dog saw another dog, different in species, have mated and produce another combination of the species, and it's another species. According to Darwin, this is what is causing natural selection, a really acceptable and growing kind of theory, because you can see different breeds of dog in the world today. Now, this is actually in contrast, or the opposite of natural selection is artificial breeding, or the other term for that is um, artificial selection, or another term for that is selective breeding. Now, this is what we're trying to do now. We grow animals in our house, see to it that you have another breed of the same kind, so that when you mate them together, you produce an offspring that is closely similar, if not very similar, to the parent which is of the same breed. So this time, you did not give the animals the natural process to select what they want, but rather you control the environment so that you can produce species that are specific and identified. That is now what you call as artificial selection, or it is also called a selective breeding. This is actually the opposite of the Darwinian principle on natural selection, which is to allow all living organisms to reproduce, whether they will reproduce with their own kind or with a different kind, because it produces diversification in the occurrences, or in the appearances, or in the population of the living organisms in this world. Well, I just want to exert something here. I am a pet owner, actually a responsible pet owner. I own more or less 12 cats. Two of them are staying inside my home. Now, it is always our practice to breed these cats. Okay, if they are white, they'll be breeded with white so that they will come out white. If it is caleco colored, it will be breeded with another caleco so that it will produce caleco. If it's a ginger tabby or a tuxedo kind of cat, we will breed them um, according to the breed that they have identified themselves, so that we will produce a better output, a better offspring, an offspring that will not be abnormal, because in some of the breeds of the cat, there are those breeds that do not really end up compatible with another, letting the cat end up as deaf or mute, or sometimes color blind, or many of these, what do you call it, abnormalities. That's why pet ownership and control of breeding is a very good example of artificial selection, which is the opposite of the Darwinian principle in natural selection, philosophical view number 3, which is natural selection. Okay. Going forward, Darwinian philosophical viewpoint on natural selection, philosophical view number 4. If the environment changes rapidly, some species may not be able to adapt fast enough through the natural selection. This is the main reason why many animals that are present in the past are already non-existent today. Now, another Darwinian principle is natural selection talks about the capacity of the living organisms to adapt. Okay, that's why in the principle of natural selection, it's more of animal adaptation rather than animal strength. An animal can be very powerful, but if it has lesser adaptive capabilities, that animal is still weak in terms of natural selection capabilities. Now, this is the explanation why dinosaurs are very big animals. In fact, they have representatives in the river, in the seas, in the air, in the land. Their size are so big in when it comes to dominion. But the problem with dinosaurs is that they're too big, that when the environment was twisted, their food source got already distracted. They competed for food until later on they tried to kill each other because they cannot adapt to a new society where the food is different. Because of this, inner species versus inner species of the dinosaurs try to destroy this other. Famine plus destruction of internal species, this ends up in failure of adaptation because of environmental pressures and what do you call this? Environmental pressures and inner breed pressure. This is the main reason why philosophical view number 4 of the Darwinian philosophical viewpoints on natural selection compounded the fact that dinosaurs are extinct today because they cannot adapt to the changing environment or to the pressures around them. Now, the last philosophical view of the Darwinian philosophical viewpoints of natural selection, view number 5, it says, heritability is a very good example of natural selection. Darwin pointed out that not all traits of the parents appear in the child, which is his own explanation while three children of the same couple will have similarities, but they will never be complete and the same. Well, if you come to think of it, Darwin is trying to tell us that what do you call this? That the traits, okay, that the traits of individuals may just be the same at some points, but at some points it will be different because it is the one that is creating diversification of the species. So Darwin is trying to tell us that until now, the species are still multiplying and we still don't know how many species are there, how many species will be extinctive, and how many species will be created more because of this philosophical descent in natural selection. Okay, let us go now to the next subtopic here, the three types of natural selection. Now, natural selection can appear in three different ways. We have the stabilizing selection, the directional selection, and the disruptive selection. Let's discuss them one by one. Stabilizing selection, what do we mean by this? Darwin said, this type of natural selection occurs when there are selective pressures working against two extremes of a trait, and therefore the intermediate or the middle trait is selected for. If we look at a distribution, okay? Well, let me give an example here of stabilizing selection. For a plant, the plants that are very tall are exposed to more wind and are at a risk of being blown down. Okay? So these are the pine trees. The plants that are very short fail to grow enough height. That's why it cannot get enough sunlight because it will be covered by other trees. So that's a disadvantage also. So according to Darwin, in the stabilizing selection, the plants that are middle height and those the plant that are middle height, not too high, okay, that can be destroyed by wind pressure, and not too low that cannot get the sunlight also, okay, are the plants that get enough sunlight and protection from the wind, and these plants will be the better plants that will grow. That is a stabilizing selection, meaning, okay, the extremes, if it's having an extreme this way, the dilapidation is low, extreme this way, dilapidation is low. If you're at the middle, you get half of everything, and it is the best that you can have in order to successfully exist. So this is a very eye-opening theory. This type of natural selection, the stabilizing selection, is actually a clever mental intrusion. Second, you have the directional selection. The theory here is this type of natural selection occurs when selective pressures are working in favor of one extreme trait. Therefore, when looking at the distribution of traits in the population, a graph tends to lean more to one side. Well, the example I gave in your handouts are giraffes. Okay, giraffes with the longest necks are able to reach more leaves, okay, because they prey on higher plants or taller plants. Now, selective pressures will work in the advantage of the longer neck giraffes, and therefore, the distribution of a trait within the population will shift towards the longer neck and trait. What do I mean by this? So, giraffe, which have shorter necks, will have lesser capability of eating greater food, greater trees, because they have shorter necks. So, what is the selection this time? The selection this time is the longer your neck, the better is the capability of having the best food. That is actually directional selection. We'll give another example to that. Example, tigers prey on their supposed to be food with their speed. So, the more that the tiger is fast in running and has the capability of fastly engulfing their prey, which will be their food, the better will be the capability that they will get fat and they will get full. So this time, the direction is the faster tigers will have the better meals. Okay? The slower tigers will still eat, but they have the lesser quality of meals, or sometimes they may not even eat because there will be no more left for them. So directional selection is just a selection of the greater kind in a greater race. If you notice, there are no extremes here. It's only one direction, and the top of that direction is the winner of the selection. Now let us go to the third one. You have here the disruptive selection. The theory here is this type of natural selection occurs when selective pressures are working in favor of one extreme of a trait. Therefore, when looking at the distribution of trait in a population, a graph tends to lean more on one side. Now, let me point out the example here. This type of natural selection occurs when selective pressures are working in favor of two extremes and against the intermediate trait. Okay? The type of selection is not that common when looking at the trait distribution. Okay, so what do we see here in this kind of selection? Now, example, if the woods are colored brown, and then there are two butterflies that are traveling in the wild, one is a white butterfly and one is a brown butterfly. The tendency of the brown butterfly surviving the attack because of the disruption of the color of the woods, which is just like it, is better than the white butterfly, who will be very, very visible during the travel in the woods, and they will most likely be eaten by frogs, eaten by snakes, and eaten by other wild animals. This is disruptive selection. Now let us change the environment. Now, these two butterflies traveled in a snow-filled forest where the trees are covered with ice. So the white and the brown butterfly traveled, Okay, expectedly, you cannot notice the white butterfly because of the color of the snow. So, wild animals will see clearer the brown butterfly and they will prey on it, make it their first priority because it's very obvious. The disruption of the white environment, making the white butterfly not seen, is actually a very good example of disruptive selection. So these are the three types of natural selection, okay, that Darwin has pointed out in his book. You have the stabilizing selection, the directional selection, and the disruptive selection. Now going to the last subtopic of our module. We have here the principal issues in natural selection. Well, natural selection seemed to be a clever theory, seemed to be an intellectual theory from an intellectual scientist and philosopher, Charles Darwin. However, every theory has its own issues and problems. Now, let me present to you three of the problems that Darwin faced, or the theory of Darwin, the natural selection faced. Issue number one: the authentic organization of organisms with life does not really flow well with the theory of natural selection, as there seem to be no environmental and species-based struggle now between organisms. In fact, there is already an observed harmonious coexistence of species with life. Natural selection is trying to tell us that there is chaos, there is commotion, there is misinterpretation. There is actually species to species interaction because they do not know their species, which is, if you will notice now, chicken go with fellow chicks go with fellow chicken, frogs go with fellow frog, horses go with fellow horses, dogs with dogs, and humans with humans. There is, I think, no confusion between breeds or between objects of life as pointed out, or species of life as pointed out by natural selection. Now, the evidence now of an environment that we have, of course, you do not see weird horses now coming from two horses, of which Darwin is still trying to explain that there is still natural selection because of the diversified creation of two traits. But today, when two horses mate, a horse comes out. It might be a different face, different skin, but the horse will look like a horse. So this is a problem now of the natural selection theory because the authentic organization of organisms and the system that life is the system of life that we're having now, wherein living organisms live independently, harmoniously, if not triggered by each other, seem to destroy the basis of natural selection. Issue number two: if man is still subjected to natural selection, now why are there only variation in facial appearances but not really with the race depictions? In natural selection, continuing process is adaptive. Now this is also what I'm asking. If Charles Darwin is really trying to say that there is natural selection until now, why is it that when a human being is born, the eyes is really at the higher part of the head, the nose at the middle, the mouth at the lower part, and the ears at the side? If natural selection is correct and there is species to species disruption of the traits being carried, it should have been that some people who are born today, their nose is at the side, their eyes are in the area where the mouth is now, and their mouth is on the top of the head, or something like this. But there is organization of the parts of the system of the living organisms, making it impossible to believe that until now there is still species variance or species variation that is happening, which is the bread and butter of natural selection, okay, which they said is still happening until now. Okay, what we're trying to see is humans of different traits but of the same facial and body organization. Because of this, natural selection is in great question and is in turmoil nowadays. Issue number three: If natural selection can deplete and increase species, why is it that dinosaurs get themselves extinct, but in the process of natural selection by reproduction, a dinosaur never came out of selection process? Now, here is the twist now for issue number 3. If dinosaurs, elephants, alligators came from one distinctive parent, which mated with another parent and come out with an offspring different from another, and one of the offspring happened to be dinosaurs, and when these dinosaurs become so many because of competition and because of pressure from the environment, they were extinctive. Why is it that in the law of averages, in the law of natural occurrences, not a single dinosaur came out of the reproductive process or the joining of two traits which is always mathematically probable and mathematically what? Possible if natural selection as a theory is believed to be correct. Until now, no dinosaurs are coming out, causing us to question, why is there selectiveness in the selection of traits that will come out from the genes that produces other kinds or other breeds, if this natural occurrences as a theory is correct? Now, those three issues are really hard to fathom if you are discussing natural selection. However, these issues are very easy to explain if you have a Christian background. Now, in the Christian point of view, we always believe that there is a God who is the Alpha and Omega. We always believe that there was a God who is very fair, an omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent God who created everything equal. And we believe that the logic of creation is the greatest problem of natural selection. What do we believe? That there is a God who created everything of the same number, of the greater purpose, of systemic value, of organized setups, that when man started to grow, a person without ending and beginning has already organized this world, and this organization is known now as creation. This is the only logical explanation why we have a complete world today that is still existing. Yes, having a little breed interferences, but not anymore having total and fast natural selection. I hope and pray that after this lecture, you need to understand that as science students, we really have to study natural selection, not because we wanted to believe all of this, but because we wanted to know how they believe, and we can reason out the way we wanted to in the way they believe, logically and philosophically. Remember always, if these theories will challenge our faith, it will just make our faith stronger that there is a God who organized, who drove, who created, and who made everything possible. That's why it's beyond human understanding and explanation why we have a complete functional and systemic world, even if it was disrupted by sin. Why? Because God created this one, and it is not just a mere natural selection. God bless everyone, and I hope that you enjoyed our discussion on one of science's greatest philosophical topic of all times, and that is the natural selection. Once again, this is Academia Gonzaga, and this is our discussion on the philosophy of biology on the specific topic, natural selection. I will now leave you. This is Mentor Noy, and hope to see you again in the next learning that we will have.